Welcome back to our fifth and final panel at our fourth Diverse Ed virtual event. I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by four of our youth speakers working in collaboration with our partner, Phoenix Education. So let me introduce who we're going to be hearing from on this panel. Firstly, we have Fatma Shami. Fatma is an education-focused activist, a public speaker and a social action enthusiast. She challenges the thoughts and opinions of those in positions of power to amplify the change that is possible. We have Nykeda Bekoe-Amoako. Nykeda is a young leader, a student advocate and an aspiring entrepreneur, striving for change and making space for voices that are often unheard. We have Reese Marley Robinson. Reese is a Black British student and athlete campaigning on issues of social justice inside and outside of the school system, including at the school that I went to, my sister went to, and my dad went to. So it's very special to have you here, Reese, representing our school. And our final speaker on this panel is Yumna Hussen. Yumna is the Deputy Member of Youth Parliament for Birmingham, the Chair of the Birmingham Aspiring Youth Council, and Bite Back 2030 Youth Leader. More broadly, she is a multidisciplinary artist, campaigner across multiple systems, public speaking, and she's recently done a TEDx talk. She's a published author and a writer. The imposter syndrome is kicking in, ladies, focusing on personal growth, unity, and service as a way to achieve transformative education. It's an absolute delight to have you all here. Benny and I are going to disappear, so you can chair your own panel, and we'll then come back for the Q&A at the end of the panel.
Hello. So welcome everyone. Thanks for attending the second youth panel event held by Diverse Ed. So me and Yumna will be co-hosting this panel along with amazing other student activists and campaigners like Nykeda and Reese. So I'll hand over to Yumna now.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining. All of us are, as individuals, very passionate about social action and are already shaping incredible campaigns locally and nationally about education, whether that's changing policies that affect young people and conducting research for young people by young people. We're all part of CML, which is Changemakers Lab. It's a project run by Phoenix Education Trust, working with young people who want to change the current education system to better reflect the needs and rights of others.
So today's theme is on visibility and specifically focused on early career teachers. And we're going to open with the theme of visibility on schools and early teacher careers. So what are the possible meanings? What are the possible issues? What are different people or organisations doing? So Yumna's just dropped off, so I'm just going to cover what she was meant to say. So we're going to be answering a couple of questions in which each panelist will have 2 to 3 minutes to give us their thoughts, personal experiences, if they feel comfortable in sharing and hopefully inspiring us all to mobilise and act through targeted solutions. Please post your questions in the chat because if we have time in the end, we'll be answering a few. And please follow our social media if possible. Thank you. And I'll kick off the first question now. So when have you felt visible in the education system and when have you felt invisible? So I'll start off and then I will hand over to Nykeda. I guess for me, I felt visible in the education system. Well, to be honest, I've never really seen myself visible in the education system. And for me, it was because kind of that lack of diversity between the teachers and the schools that I went to. So I went to a very prominent white dominant school and I was the only one who wore a scarf. And so because I was the only one who wore a scarf, for me, that was really strict on policy. Like I couldn't have the free reign like everybody else did. So I guess that's when I kind of felt invisible because I felt like essentially I felt like an alien in that school, I'll be honest. Because I didn't really see much people looking like me and it was just different. And I guess when have I felt visible? I don't really think I have ever felt visible. So I'm going to hand over to Nykeda now.
I would say a time where I probably felt visible would be when I did my Jack Petty speech, where I have eczema, so I decided to base my speech on like skin conditions and the struggles that people go through with those. And I just did some research on how people with skin conditions are perceived in other countries, and how in some places they can be ostracized, or some places they're bullied so much that they're forced to leave school. And I thought that was like a really important thing to like let people know. Um, a time I felt invisible would probably be um, when like I might want to express my views, but I would have to hold back because I don't want to be um, deemed as aggressive purely because of my skin color. Or if I did, I would be responded with comments such as like, I don't see color. And I feel like if you don't see color, you don't see me. And that ultimately makes me feel like, yes, I am invisible. So I'm gonna hand over to Reese.
Yeah, so I've felt visible. Let's start with the positives here. I felt visible when my school have made an effort. I think I'll just give you a bit of like background to where my school is and the percentages of ethnic minorities. So we don't even have percentages of our school. We don't have a population census. I'm in a predominantly white area. I live in the southwest of England, and we are the only black family. My family's the only black family. So when my school decided to do Caribbean food, that's when I felt visible. And they came and they emailed my family and said, how can we get this right? Tell us the recipe. Where can we buy the food? So we had food being shipped from London, where I am now, being shipped from London to the southwest of England, and we had curry goat and rice. And that's when I felt most visible, because that was akin to my culture. I think where I felt most invisible is probably in the curriculum and also in the staffing of my school. There is no one that looks like me, and I think I'll touch upon that in later questions, but that can be quite damaging for people to not see themselves represented in the staffing. And also in the curriculum, it's always been my family or I having to go and do research for myself, as opposed to learning about it in a holistic way at school. And I think school should be a place where people can learn whatever they want whenever they want. So yeah. Yumna's back. So Yumna, do you want to answer the question? The question was, where have you felt visible and where have you felt invisible?
Yeah, so thanks, Reese. So I attend school in Birmingham. So obviously it's a very multicultural city, multicultural area. I live in inner city Birmingham. So I actually have the privilege of, attending school where you've got teachers who look like me and you feel visible, they're from the local area and the community, so it's very relatable. But I do believe that the schooling and the wider education system, it doesn't accommodate for student and staff's shifting and complex identities. But I also believe that it's important that we appreciate and that we understand the nuances in our lived experiences and in our stories, because oftentimes we view, say, a race as homogeneous. So there's no sort of nuance in the story. And in fact, in schooling, we can choose to enrich people's cultural identities, like Reese touched upon. Her school didn't accommodate for Caribbean students like her, but schools, if they're given the choice, they can accommodate for people's cultural individuality and in their interpersonal experiences. And as like teachers in their early stage in their career, it's important for them to collaborate with students to develop that critical consciousness, critical thinking ability, to prepare leaders who have a deeper awareness of social structures and social practices and policies that result in, the oppression and the exclusion and the marginalization of certain social groups. And currently, even the curriculum, it doesn't facilitate for these sorts of conversations. So it's important for us to have a multidisciplinary approach to learning so that we're equipped to tackle issues in a multi-layered and structural way. So it's more inclusive and more comfortable for everyone involved. That also leads us very nicely into the second question, which is about the curriculum. So how do you see yourself in the curriculum? How much do you see yourself in the teaching staff, which I already touched upon? And do you think, as young people, do you have a voice within the schooling system? Do you have a voice within, whether that's with your teachers, whether that's with higher level staff? And in my experience, obviously, I don't think that the curriculum is accurately representative of the students that, you know, they teach. And, you know, there was a study conducted by the University College London, UCL, which said that 46% of all schools have no teaching staff from minority communities. And that is an upsetting statistic when you think about it, because all four of us today, we are all girls who are from minority ethnic communities, you know, and we need to be asking three things. Why is the recruitment of teachers, first of all, not being targeted to specific communities? What severe impacts and negative impacts can this have on students later down the line? And what practical steps can we actually take to mitigate this? Because at the end of the day, visible diversity is not part of the solution. It's part of the solution, but it doesn't actually directly address the root cause of the issue, which is inherently systemic, as we all know. And whilst the levels of educational attainment and degrees have improved significantly for people who are from ethnic minority communities, the successes haven't directly, say, translated into market outcomes for teachers in the teaching profession. And when I was thinking about the statistic, and I was thinking about the underlying reason behind the statistic, it may be that early stage career teachers realize that the school that they are applying to, for example, it doesn't actually align with their own beliefs and their own values, and it's not as inclusive as they would have liked. And without an understanding of how social inequities work together to create unjust structures, I believe that education has and will continue to be the production and reproduction of social injustices. I'm going to hand over to Reese to answer that question as well.
Yeah, I would say for me, with the idea of like representation in staffing in curriculum, for me it doesn't happen, and for a lot of people it doesn't happen, and that's a really big problem. And it's very easy to say, oh well, you go to a predominantly white school, so it doesn't matter about your representation. But then again, that goes back to the point of being invisible. And I think that with schools, they have to be havens for everyone. You can't have schools where people aren't allowed. Therefore, if you're going to allow people to come into your school, you have to accommodate them in the correct way. And that could be and should be, at the very basic level, representation in staffing and representation in the curriculum. You can't afford to have children in your school who, firstly, probably don't know their own ancestry, and secondly, the people around them don't know their ancestry, so can't treat them in a way that is correct, and that's a problem. And I see it as levels. I think this is the base level. It's the bare minimum that a school can do, is to allow a child to be visible in their representation. And that is the slight problem, is that people think that that is really above their station. They think it's very hard to represent children in staffing, and sometimes that can be, I think it's difficult when a school decides that that is the hardest thing that they can do, then everything else becomes a chore. And it's not a chore, because diversity enriches a school, and that is what people need to see.
I would say I don't really see myself in the curriculum, and if we do cover Black History Month, it's really like 1 or 2 lessons. And living in London, if we are learning about Black history, it's normally about American history and not about Black British history. And it also seems like us as the students are made to feel like it's our duty to educate our peers, where like I don't mind educating my peers, but I also don't like to be felt like it's my duty, especially like living in London. It's a diverse society, and I feel like it's really important to decolonize the curriculum so that students can learn about many different backgrounds. And I'd also say with the staffing is not very diverse, as Reese said, and like some students may feel like they don't have that place to relate to teachers, and also if they don't see themselves within the staff, it's kind of hard for them to be like, to see themselves like, oh, when I grow up, I might want to be a teacher, because I don't see it and I don't have something to look up to. Yeah. So that's what I would say, and I'm going to pass on to Fatima.
Just to actually touch on that point, when I was younger, I really wanted to be a teacher, and one of the reasons why I actually dislike teaching right now is because of the lack of representation. So I'll touch upon that point. And so for me, like, how do you see yourself in the curriculum? I think it's like a one-fits-all approach, to be honest, because they've gone for what's majorly works without testing the others, and that doesn't work for everybody, because like we're all diverse here, but we all feel like the education system doesn't cater to our needs, especially when being visible, and especially in the actual teaching staff. And like, so like my old school, a predominantly white school, there was no diversity. It was just the same staff, same people, and like, how are we meant to break out of a routine, and how are we meant to break out of a habit? And like Reese said, like, equality and diversity is very rich, and it is essential to make a school grow and flourish. And I feel like, so I'm going to touch upon the point about a voice within the school and the education system. To be honest, I feel like I personally am a minority, trying like a majority, trying to represent the voice, because it's just this whole one system fits all. And especially, like, I feel like, I don't personally know about private schools, but from what I've heard, it's kind of similar. It's sort of got a bit more diversity than public state schools, but it's not the same. And so essentially, I feel like I do have a voice, but that voice isn't amplified enough. It just gets shut down the minute they realise that I'm a minority, not a majority, and then they think, oh, we can't take this further. Moving on to our next question, which is, what are the practical strategies for improving visibility? Like, what can we do? What students can do? What can teachers do? I guess essentially for me, what I'd say is, because I'm now a college student, at my college we have various like clubs, if you call them that, and it's all about. So we have a Black LGBTQ plus club, where if you identify any of those, you just go, you turn up, no questions asked, and the teachers are diverse, so they also bring out outside speakers to come and speak to us. And I guess it's just having like a place, like, even if it's just once a week, where students can come in and like they can feel like they're represented and they're visible in that school. I guess teachers can be more inclusive, because when it comes to dealing with some issues about topics that really matter to other people, like might not matter as much to them, like Black History Month, but like to actually be a bit sensitive when discussing these issues, I guess. And I shall hand over to Nykeda.
Yeah, I would say it's really important for teachers to like provide spaces where students can speak. And I would say, I know that this doesn't happen everywhere in many schools, but I'd say I think my school embodies this really well, because there's things you can get as a student. I can get involved in, like a quality committee, school council, being form representative. And that also gives you the quality to also be able to not only speak about how you feel, but also to be the voices for your peers. I would say that is a very important thing to be done. So and also things like getting students involved with the big decisions that they make, such as their racism policy. Like, what would we want to see? How would we want the school to work? And I feel like if that's done, children will feel more visible within the school and the education system. I'm going to pass on to Yumna now.
Yeah, so just echoing what Nykeda and I think Reese touched on before about the levels. So, some schools, they don't have diverse staff, so that would be a first thing, trying to understand why that there's a lack of recruitment in Black ethnic minority communities, and actually consulting students on what they want to learn, how they want to learn it, and in what environment they want to learn it in. And each strategy actually should be specific to the school and take into context everything, from teaching staff, reading lists. There's a lot of reading lists that don't include, authors from people of color, for example, and especially like the language. So the language that is used within schools, making sure that I think Fatima touched upon this, and she said the sensitivity. So certain topics might be sensitive for certain people from different communities, and I think there's three aspects actually. It's personal growth, unity, and service. And Hannah actually said this in my introduction. And that's we need to stop jumping to seismic and systemic change, and we need to actually start looking at what we can do ourselves, how we can educate ourselves to then change the people closest around us, whether that's the school, whether that's teachers, whether that's colleagues, whether that's peers, whether that's friends, and then actually start building and growing outwards like that. And also, I also want to touch on that funding and resources is obviously disproportionately distributed, and oftentimes government organizations and other institutions that are intended to serve society often propagate the structure that certain lives and certain voices are more worthy of others. And you always see this in school, as students. There's certain panels, or there's certain groups that a student can be involved in. For example, let's say student council, but we don't look at the hierarchical position that it often places students in. So it says it's basically, students can feel that their idea is not worthy as someone else's, which is damaging to their self-esteem as well. I think I want to hand over back to Fatima, or is it Reese?
I'll just quickly jump in. Pretty much just to second everything that's been said, like really, really touch upon that point that Yumna said about affecting the people around you. It's about affecting your own social chasm that you're in. So for me, that's the people around me, that's my school, because it is definitely a personal growth journey. You cannot enforce ideas onto people that don't want to listen. And I think that sometimes can be hard for young people, especially of an ethnic minority. Sometimes people don't want to listen, and that can be very difficult. But then my question is, so then why are they in a position to have power? If they don't want to listen, who gives them that authority to then not listen to our voices? And I think for me, a strategic plan would be to look at your staffing. You have to look at that. That's paramount. You have to look and you have to see what your school community needs, whether that is it needs more teachers who identify as part of the LGBTQ plus community, who identify as ethnic minorities, who identify as not able-bodied. You have to see what your community needs, and then you have to cater for them, whether that is amplifying their voices as students, or whether that's having student councils like Nykeda, or having safe spaces, cultivate safe spaces that aren't performative. And that's really important as well. This diversity, this visibility can't be performative. It has to be deep, and it has to hit every mark. And that can be difficult sometimes, but it's a slow journey and there's levels to it. And it's okay to mess up. That's another thing. The vulnerability to mess up is okay. And people know, if you come from a place where you're really trying to make people visible, people feel that. I'm sure the other girls and we feel that when people are trying their hardest, you can feel that. And it's okay to mess up, and it's okay to put your hands up and say you've messed up, but at least you have a plan and you're trying to implement it. I'll hand back to Fatma.
Okay, and so I'm just going to wrap up just before we get into the question and answer. And so I'm going to summarize a key point, but I'm going to let everybody each summarize one point that matters the most to them. So you've got 4 takeaways to take away. So for me, I will definitely say, so I'm going to steal Reese's point, sorry Reese. And it's about the diversity and equality in schools. That just basically completes your school. If you don't have that in your school, that's not going to, just forget about your school, put it that way, because that is the base of your school. Having that diversity in your school will then help, because you see things from different perspectives, and it's not always a one-fits-all approach. Everybody then can contribute, and everybody then make sure that they're visible and they feel represented. And so I will hand over to Nykeda.
I would say one really important thing to take away from today is allow your students to have that space where they're able to voice their opinions and have a say in the school that they're in. And I'm going to pass on to Reese.
I would say there's a lot to take away from this, but if I was to pick one thing, I would say make sure that you affect your social chasm in as deep and meaningful way as you possibly can.
I'm just going to say that, you know, young people's ideas need to not be taken as tokenistic, but directly embedded within policy making. And that goes to teachers as well. And we need accountability, real commitment, and the space in order to build and create that change that is possible and that is needed.
I think we're heading off to a Q&A now. If that's
just before we go into the Q&A, it's all right, don't worry about it. Yumna, have you got any campaigns that you would like people to take forward?
Yes, so there's Not a Trend, which is currently building a campaign around decolonising the education system, so educating students and teachers about anti-racist work. And also I wanted to touch upon this very quickly, that diversity and diversification is very surface level. You know, decolonisation is much, much, much deeper than that. It's acknowledging how power and privilege play out within our schools, within our institutions, and restructuring that in a way that is inclusive. And also I'm launching a youth-led organisation called Resilience soon, which is basically about personal growth, educating young people so that they can create the change that is possible. And I think I'm going to hand back up to Fatima because we're going to do our Q&A section.
So I'd like to bring Hannah and Bernie back for the Q&A.
Thank you, panelists. Fantastic insights. The social media is going off the charts. You're going to have to read all the comments afterwards. We've just got some questions to pose to you to tease out some of the things you've already said. Great insights. Reese, let me start with you. And thank you for, in your opening, Reese, for doing the positive reframe about what is working rather than going straight in for the deficit model, which people tend to do when we think about diversity, equity, inclusion. Could you speak a little bit more, Reese, about how we go about disrupting the power dynamic in a school? I know this is part of what the Young Changemakers does. How do we disrupt that hierarchy that the adult voice is seen as being more important than the young person's voice?
From a student perspective, it's having that idea that that person is no better than you. They deserve respect based on their position, but they are no better than you. And because of their skin color, because of their sexual orientation, because of their job, that does not mean that they hold more power than you. That does not mean that their voice is above you. Then from a teacher perspective, like I said before, it's about having that humility. And so as a teacher, if you have that humility, you become approachable. And you become a person where students can come and actually speak to you and voice their opinions. And I think that's probably the best way, is to have this open, this dynamic between teachers where it's open. Conversation is very fluid and open. Yeah.
Thank you, Reese. And you mentioned the word voice there. So Nykeda, let me come back to you, because I taught in London for 15 years. I love the Jack Petchey Award, as does Benny. Like, that's such an important thing, but you don't get that elsewhere in the country. It's only in some of the urban school environments. And just share about that, about the opportunity to use your voice and share your voice in that school context, and perhaps other opportunities you have or haven't had to have voice within your school as well.
Yeah, I would say it's very important for students to have a voice, and for me to have the opportunity to do Jack Petchey. I feel like at first when you're doing it, you think it's something that's like personal to you and you want people to realize so you can be seen as visible, but you also don't see how what you're doing is also affecting people, and people really appreciate that you've like spoken up for them. Because after my Jack Petty speech, a lot of students came to me to say like thank you and talk about like the skin conditions that they also have and like what they're struggling with, and you don't realize until you like make that step. So although it's nerve-wracking, by you making small steps, you're also helping others to feel like, oh yes, I can do that too. So yeah, I would say having a voice in the school community is really important.
I love that, Nykeda. And what I'm hearing is you might not have had the role models, but you become the role models that you actually needed as well. Fatma, let me come to you. So similar kind of question, thinking about opportunities within the curriculum particularly, like all of you are social activists, and have you been taught social justice? Has it featured in any of your subjects at school out of interest?
Nope.
So where did you learn it then? How did you find out about it?
Okay, so this is going. It's a long story short. What happened was at my old school, because I went to two different high schools, and at my very first high school that I went to, there was this project called Reclaim. They're called Reclaim Manchester Project, so you guys should check them out. And at the time, they came in, they did like an icebreaker session with us. From there, I then went on to doing a program with them, which then made me realize, oh, look, I have a voice. Let me speak out. Let me go into social action. Let me go into social activism. And I guess that's kind of what started like me. And I think I was only like 12 at the time. So I've been doing this for a while now. It's been very long, but that's what started for me.
Brilliant, Fatma, thank you. Benny, do you want to ask them all some questions?
I do. Thank you. It's been so interesting listening to you, and I'm fascinated by your take on staffing and school structures, and the fact that you speak so clearly about the need for representation. And my question is, and there's a question reflected in the comments as well, that quite often, you'll have head teachers who say they want to make a change. They'll say that they'll actively try to recruit people from different backgrounds. But actually, there's a statistic that says 46% of schools don't have any BAME staff, for want of a better term. So how do we change that? What would drive people to areas where they're not representative? Is that dangerous? How do people feel about that? Why do you think it's happening? Reese, we start with you and we'll go around.
Yeah, I'm happy to take a little portion of this question. So, for me personally, I only moved to the area where I go to school because of my dad's job, and I wouldn't say they actively searched for him. I wouldn't say that. I think for teachers actively searching, there are a plethora of people from my ethnic minority background just waiting for an opportunity. They might not be in the place that you would often look. I know for a private school, there are websites where people look for teachers. They might not be on there because they might not know. They might not have the opportunity to be there. So it's about going and actively looking for those teachers that you want to affect your diversity. And then in terms of the general population, that is about having those difficult conversations. It's about bringing your staff in on those induction days and saying, right, we're going to sit and we are going to talk about this problem. And we're going to debunk these problems together as a general staffing population, because that's where you get change. I think you can't just have like 2 or 3 teachers being the halo heads where all the kids go, oh yeah, I love going to that teacher. They really helped me with my problems regarding my race or my sexuality. That has to be a general teaching population. It's the bare minimum for me of a staffing body.
Thank you. And I think it comes down to that, what you said around making active choices around, going out to seek people who will reflect the world that we live in. And I like the idea that, actually it's a responsibility for schools to go out and do that. It's not going to happen by accident. And Nykeda, I was listening to you right at the beginning, and you were talking about that kind of colorblind approach in schools. So there is a lot of narrative in education around, kind of conformity. And, if we start talking about race, then race becomes an issue. How do you respond to that as a young person?
I would say I don't think that specifically happens within my school in itself, but hearing those comments is kind of hard because it's like you're not really like acknowledging what I'm saying, because when I'm saying it to you, you're saying you don't see color. You're ultimately telling me you don't see that as an issue. How do you respond to that? I just think we have to like try our hardest to like explain to them. Although, as I said, it's not my duty to. I also feel like maybe that's what needs to be done, but people also need to take responsibility to do their own research. And yes, some people may not know, like the things that they may say is offensive. So yes, we can tell them that. But also you need to like try and educate yourself. And I think, and also they could do that by also like Black History Month, for instance, include these things. What things can we say? What things shouldn't we what things shouldn't we say? And I also feel like it shouldn't be an awkward conversation, because race and racism is a conversation that needs to be done. It's something that we need to deal with, and potentially something that we can work towards an end. So yeah.
Absolutely. I totally understand your point. And just, I think some teachers are afraid of having that conversation. And I think that's where quite often people don't talk about it. Hannah, back over to you.
I'm glad we got Yumna back, and her audio visual's not working, but we have got her audio. So my question for you, Yumna, you talked about this multidisciplinary approach we need to disrupt kind of systemic practices and policies. Can you explain a little bit more what you mean about that to our listeners, please, Yumna?
Yes, of course. So that means sort of creating those inclusive environments for young people, that, you know, includes them in everything. So whether that's learning, whether that's, you know, teaching them about their culture, teaching them about their own heritage, whether that's because I know that in schools there's a lot of subject specific approaches, but there isn't multidisciplinary approaches, so cross teaching across different subjects. And I think that early stage teachers, they have the opportunity to collaborate with different subject departments to really bring forth inclusivity, equality and diversity within their practice. And also, in my own like personal opinion, I think project-based learning is the future. I think project-based learning is the way to go, because the world now has become so globalized and so interconnected that distant subjects with, you know, I think that in some schools they do collaborate with different subjects, departments. For example, foreign languages collaborate with English department on a certain project. But I think that it needs to be a long-term thing. It's not I don't think it's possible to do to only do this to only do this once a year. It doesn't work. And to show students to basically enrich their own experiences and their own learning, I think multidisciplinary learning is the way to go.
Thank you so much, Yumna, for clarifying that kind of expression you use. And Fatma, tell me if I was wrong. I wrote down critical consciousness. I think that was a phrase that you used. Quite a few of the, was it not? I can't think who said it, but one of the questions that's come through is about what should schools be doing around the teaching of social consciousness and the teaching of ethics. And I'd like to ask that question to all of you. And you might perhaps want to share what you've been doing with Phoenix Education and Changemakers Lab to almost fill the gap of what the school system isn't giving you. So Fatma, do you want to kick off first and answering that question about this idea of social consciousness and ethics and what the school is or isn't doing and what Changemakers are doing with you?
So I guess I'll start off with Changemakers. So with Changemakers, what they've done is they've given us all a voice. So they took us on board. They were like, oh, we'll take you on board. We'll see, where do you want to go with this? And so we've had several sessions. And we've just sat and we've all discussed what does everything mean to us. Like, why do we feel strongly about this? Is this being allowed in schools? Is it not being allowed in schools? And we get different perspectives. Like Reese is private school, and then most of us are all funded schools. So we all see this different perspective that interlinked. And then in terms of schools don't really do much about this. Like they don't really like say they don't really like teach us about this, or they don't how do I put this? They don't really care about it on the side. It's just seen as an extracurricular thing to them. I know that's what I've had in my I've had that in my experience. They've said to me, "Oh yeah, cool." When I said, "Can we include this into our like curriculum, or can we include this like as a outside thing, like a club?" They said to me, "Oh, cool, but look, it's meant to be an outside thing. It's not really to do with us." So I guess that's kind of what it really means to me. And then it's just the fact that with minorities as well, it's that point again, like minorities, we're the minority trying to like be heard in a majority, and like because we're so small, they crush our thoughts straight away. Like they say to us, "Oh look, it doesn't matter," when really it really does matter. And I'd like to say this, like they prefer certain ethnicities over another one, because they think that that's more understood and they can cater more to that one. But if they just listen and they just sit and like have a heart-to-heart conversation with us, they'll realize it's affecting all of us. It's not just a one thing approach. And I'll open up the floor to anybody who wants to go next.
Well, thank you, Fatma, because what I want to pick up there is the fact that we've got different layers of power at play as well. So you've got the kind of the adult and student power dynamic. You've then got the male, female, the white, black, the Christianity and other cultures and other faiths. So then the intersectionality of some of your experiences means you've almost got like a quadruple whammy going on there. Let me come to you, Reese, because Fatma mentioned your school context. I'm interested whether your curriculum's perhaps doing anything around this idea of ethics and social consciousness.
So I would say that a lot of schools have the benefit of having PSHE lessons. So that's personal, social, healthcare education. At our school, we call it enrichment. And I think they do touch upon things, but they don't touch upon it in enough depth where it really hits people where it should hurt, I guess. Because for example, we were speaking about COVID and the impacts that that's had. And we were also speaking about health and how your health can almost be diminished as you go along. And I said, "Oh, miss, what about race? Because that disproportionately affects ethnic minorities." And she said, "Yeah, that's really valid. That's a great valid point to put on the board." She popped it on the board, and then we had like a spider diagram with all these facts about age, where you live, different things that implicate your health, and nothing about race. And I think that stood out to me as there is a massive lack of awareness of that as an issue that needs to be taught about in schools. And in general, social justice, I think they worry that it's too politicized. But I would argue that every day we see that on the news. We walk around around the town and stuff, and we see different types of people. And how is that not politicized if you want to call race or LGBTQ plus community politicized? It all is just awareness, and I think it's having this worldly perspective on the world, as opposed to just worrying that it's school and we can't implement a political side to it, because I don't think it is political.
Reese, brilliant answer there. So Fatma, you were talking about it's almost what we value and what we don't value, and by putting it into the extracurricular, it suggests there's not value. And then Reese, you're saying that when we do touch on it, it tends to be a bit, and we're not actually going into it deep enough to truly get to understand the concepts and to become critical thinkers. Yumna, the way you nodded so vehemently when Reese was talking there, let me come to you next, Yumna. What are your thoughts about this idea of how we create a curriculum or create opportunities for social consciousness and ethics within the school system?
Yeah, I think everything Reese said, it really connected, because neutrality is not afforded to us, even in a classroom. The choice to use your voice, the choice to actually speak out about something, the choice to, tell your story, how you say it, this is all political. At the end of the day, you can't say that it's not political, because in my school, especially when I've wanted to talk about issues pertaining to social justice, the response that I've gotten is too political. School, a classroom isn't this space to do this, which I think, in my opinion, no. I think that I like social justice, you get all these words flown around, they're all buzzwords. It's not actually put into practice. There's not a strategy that is put into practice, because teachers, some educators and some teachers think that it's too politicized, and we should be focusing on other things such as, like, you know, our own subjects, exams and things like that. But even, okay, if we look at exams, the exams fiasco that happened last year and this year, on exam, that is political. I think that a lot of young people have been joining these student-led movements because they've seen how much it affects their day-to-day lives in the media, in the government. And so I think that there needs to be much more of an awareness within schools. And the way to do this is obviously creating those spaces for students to talk about this, whether that's PSHE lessons where we're taught about this by a teacher who's a transformed educator, by somebody who's already done the soul searching and who's already done the work within anti-racism themselves, who are then able to educate the students and make them comfortable enough to share their stories, share their experiences, and actually work towards specific targeted solutions rather than human connection without real implementation. But then real implementation has to work alongside human connection as well. So that's my point.
Honestly, the way you guys all phrase yourself, you put so many teachers to shame. Your articulation is fantastic. Nykeda, same question to you about your experience of ethics and social consciousness within your own education, or perhaps what Phoenix and Changemakers have given you an opportunity to do.
I would definitely say that there's not enough platforms for us, and when there is, it's not advertised enough for us to get involved. And I think Changemaker was a really good place it's a really good project. It's where I got to meet these lovely other girls, and also like to see like-minded people like me. I think is really important because once we're together, we're definitely a force to be reckoned with. I also feel like Reese brought up an important thing about health, and within schools we're not taught, like there's certain diseases and health issues that are more common in certain minorities, such as sickle cell, and how a Black person is 5 times more likely to die in pregnancy, an Asian person is three more times likely to die in pregnancy. These things need to be addressed. We need to, for instance, if you have illness or like a rash or something that could lead to something further, when you search it up, there's no pictures to show what it looks like on a Black person, what it looks like on an Asian person. So I feel like there needs to be a lot more of these things, and they definitely need to be taught within schools.
Such a pertinent comment. Your feedback's just gone off there, Nykeda, about mentioning the kind of the health, the intersectionality of health. And I know there was a documentary on recently about the number of Black deaths when it comes to maternity and like childbearing. My final question to all of you, okay, thinking about the fact that we've got early career teachers listening, but also this footage will hopefully be shared in schools with other young people. And some of the words we used were mobilising, galvanising, empowering, like increasing our sphere of influence. What's your one piece of advice to people about getting involved? Because you're all great examples of the fact that you're not sat there watching the TV shouting at it, you're out there doing the work. So what's your one bit of advice about other people becoming youth activists or social activists? And let me just go in the same order again. So Reese, let me come to you first, please.
For youth activists, I would say, don't be afraid. And if you watch something and you feel something, wait, and then act upon it. And that waiting time gives you the space to think, what can I do that is going to actually cause change? Because often people see something, oh my gosh, that is so bad, I'm going to go and do this, I'm going to go do this, and this. But that's not sustainable. And social activism has to be sustainable. It has to create change. So I would act upon how you feel, go with your gut. And for other people that I'm not sure, I think if you feel something, you have to act upon it, and that's in anything in life. If you feel something regarding activism, change it. If there's nowhere for you to go, create space for you to be. Be confident in yourself and what you feel, and that will create change.
Brilliant, Reese. Thank you. Nykeda, let me come to you next. What's your thoughts on this question about galvanising and mobilising?
I would definitely say you shouldn't be scared, and even if you're nervous, use that as like your drive. There's many different definitions to being a leader. There's many different types of leaders and young leaders, and I just feel like just use that nervousness as your drive to push forward and to make a change.
Love that advice, Nykeda, thank you. And Fatma, how about you? What are your thoughts about mobilising activism?
I'd say the first start, everything starts with that first step you take. So just do it. And you might feel scared or nervous to go for it, but the minute you do and you take that step, you will go on to a journey of a lifetime and you will love it. You won't hate it and you won't drop out. You'll just be like, I'm really glad I started this.
Thank you so much. And Yumna, final comment from you.
Yeah, I think that every young person needs to be unapologetically themselves in everything that they do. Come with everything, with your full set of values, your morals, your character, and always. And one thing I wanted to add is, God, it's gone. Yeah, join projects, join groups which are like CML, where you can meet and connect and collaborate with other young people who are passionate about social action. And the point which I forgot, I've now remembered, it's activism can be done in so many different ways. I love spoken word. I've filmed spoken word poetry about racism, about justice, about issues that I'm passionate about, but it can be done in so many ways, whether that's spoken word, whether that's writing, whether that's joining groups, whether that's working behind the scenes in advocacy work, and always educating yourself. It's a journey. Final destination is not as important. It's about who you become in the process, so trust that process, and you'll definitely get there.
Thank you, Yumna. Benny, do you want to wrap up? Do you want to sum up? An amazing panel.
I'm only echoing the comments here and on Twitter and on our different platforms when I say that listening to the four of you is truly inspirational. When we think about what the future of this nation, what our future of our world needs to be, your voices are going to be so important. You've articulated yourselves in the most profound way. And for early career teachers out there who are seeing this, it is absolutely invaluable to know that you can have students who are this engaged. So a huge thank you to you all for sharing your thoughts so articulately. I almost hate to say that it's over. I could listen to you all day, but Hannah and I do need to wrap up now and get our thoughts together. So thank you again, and hopefully we'll be on the same space again at some point.
Give everyone a wave, ladies. And
could I quickly say something before we go? I just wanted to say a big thank you to Hannah and Benny and the whole Diverse Ed and Sienna and Lucy from Phoenix Education for just giving us this opportunity to voice how we feel. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Nykeda. Our pleasure. And when we get to face-to-face events, I'll be ringing you all up and booking you all in, I promise you. So you four can disappear, go and join the pledges on Twitter, and Benny and I will be back in 1 minute to finish the event.